I had the chance to sit down with a longtime mentor, Sandy Wall from the Houston SWAT Team. Great guy. Take some time to talk about his long career in police work, why it's important to write your stories down, and why dogs love him so much. I hope you enjoy it. All right, well, welcome to the show. My name is Eddie Molina, and I am the Southeast Regional Manager for the ALERRT program. The ALERRT program is a grant-funded, data-driven, research-based program out of Texas State University, trying to provide as much quality instruction for first responders around the country as we can. We've grown over the last 20 years, and you've been around here from the very beginning. So let's introduce each other. I introduced myself. I'll let you introduce yourself. Sandy?
Sandy Wall. I am from this part of the country, the Southeast Texas, and went to the big city of Houston to be a police officer and try to make a difference and get some excitement and that sort of thing away from the country life where I grew up. Spent 28 years with the Houston Police Department. 3 years of that was in the patrol division, 3 years of that in the narcotics division, and then eventually 22 years of that on a SWAT team. Last 12 years over there, I was a team leader. And I always like to say that with all of that, the only reason I didn't get fired or indicted is because I didn't get caught. And when I did get caught, I was able to blame it on somebody else. So got a pension out of the deal. And Safari Land hired me away first as a sales guy for this part of the country, and then eventually made it over to the director of training and stayed 15 years with Safari Land, and then finally retired, but somehow I'm still busy. It's amazing how that works.
Sandy, I've known you a long time, and I know you're probably never going to quit working. I guess we met through the SWAT rings. I was a long time on the San Antonio SWAT team, and just learning from all the people that knew what they were doing, and learning from the people that knew how to teach. And that was a big difference. I think that was one of the big things that stood out from the very beginning. Kind of how our paths crossed. I remember getting to the SWAT team, and as the new guy, there was an opportunity to go train. And usually those opportunities were whatever nobody else wanted to go to. And this particular class was a Rappel Master course that you guys were running. It was Sandy Wall, Ronnie Parker, Murph. Gosh,
John Murphy.
John Murphy, man. And it was a great class. Man, Sandy, I tell you what, I learned so much from that class. I hate heights, but that was one of the things, like, hey, man, if this is the opportunity, I'm going to go for it. But one of the funniest things was there was cigar smoking all week long, and I was scared out of my freaking gourd, man. Just watching y'all smoking those cigars, and it's like, oh, man, they're going to drop ashes on my rope. I just know it. I know it. Oh, man, it was a great time. But like I said, I learned a lot about composure during that week, and it was kind of cool to put yourself out there.
Yeah, the first time I rappelled, it was as a young SWAT officer going through basic school in 1979. And the lieutenant over the SWAT team was a guy named Jim Gunn. And he was like a god to me. And he was a full bird colonel in the Air Force Reserves, and as well as a lieutenant with the police department. And he was very prolific in the way he spoke, and he was very philosophical. And my first time to rappel was off of a 9-story building. They didn't start anything slow back in those days. They went right from the get-go. And I come off, and of course I'm thinking I'm going to die. Slowly made my way down to the ground, and I got on the ground. I was so relieved. I came off the rope, and I looked over there, and there's Jim Gunn standing there in his full military regalia and his hat and crisp look. And he looks at me, and I'm thinking, okay, he's going to dress me down. He says, "Son, when faced with danger and your own fears, you overcome them and you perform. Now move on." And I was like, wow. It was like God himself had spoke to me. It was amazing.
I got it. I'm with it. I got you. Man, that's awesome, Sandy. So you started a little while back. And so I just, for the people that are watching, you see us, we're sitting on his back deck, his patio. I really wanted to be able to show what his property looks like. It's a great place, and he was able to come back home, and that's kind of cool. A lot of people, when they leave home, they'll end up coming back after their careers and after their time out in the field. But you picked a hell of a career to go to, man. How did you pick police work. Was that what you wanted to do all along?
Yeah, not all along, but I would say toward the last part of my, say, high school years, I was really into hunting and fishing, and I was really going to be a game warden. I just thought that'd be really cool, just to be in law enforcement and the excitement of that, but still be in the woods and doing that sort of thing. And when I was going to college, actually here in Victoria, at University of Houston, they had a Victoria Center, and I got a night job just for extra money as a security guard. And I was going around checking buildings, and occasionally I'd find an open door. I never really found any forced entry or anything, but our protocol was we called the police department, and they would come out, and I got to search the building with the officer because he was usually by himself, and he'd say, "Come on with me," and I just thought that was so cool, and that was it, man. I said, and if I'm going to get into policing, I didn't want to be a small town police department. Nothing against them, because those guys do a great job, and they actually say. Do more with less, because they're usually by themselves, and backup's not as close as it was for me in Houston. But my job, my thoughts was, if I go to a big city, I'd be more crime, more excitement. So San Antonio wasn't hiring, Austin wasn't hiring, Houston was. That's where I ended up.
That's awesome. Golly. I know when I started growing up, the two things that I wanted to do is I wanted to play professional baseball and I wanted to be a cop. And I figured if I'm going to be a cop, I wanted to do SWAT work and I wanted to do undercover work. So I went to college and I figured out that I'm really not that good at baseball. A couple of coaches told me straight up, "You're not that good at baseball." So I was I was actually teaching in baseball camps. And I thought, well, if I'm going to do undercover work, I'd like to go do DEA stuff. I want to be really deep undercover.
Right.
And one of the parents of one of the kids that was in that baseball camp was the senior agent in San Antonio. And so I was talking to him about what I wanted to do, and he's like, "Look, man, it's like you're a sheltered kid. You really don't know a damn thing about the streets. You don't know a damn thing about being a cop just yet." And he had been a cop on the streets in San Antonio before he went into DEA. He's like, "Look, you fit the profile and you speak the language. If you get on to DEA right now, we're going to send you to South America, Central America, and we're going to send you to go deal with people that you really don't know how to deal with." He said, "So get on the police department. Spend a couple of years on the streets. And if you decide that after you learn how to be a cop that you still want to be with us, let me know and I'll be able to hook you up. I'll be able to help you walk through the process." That's what it took. And so I went over to the San Antonio Police Department. I started my career and I knew I wanted to be on the SWAT team. So my first 4 years on the streets was nothing but working out and going to the schools and making myself seen. Mm-hmm. Got on the team, and it was just, man, that was the best advice I ever got on the way into law enforcement. That's kind of how my career started. But I had a lot of fun, and I got the chance to run across guys like you who were teaching a bunch of us. At the time, you were pretty much running the TTPOA, mm-hmm. and I know you don't ever put yourself out there that you were in charge of anything. That's one of the cool things about the guys from the TTPOA is like they're all so humble. But let's talk a little bit about the Texas Tactical Police Officers Association. That program, that group started a long while back. And we were talking earlier off screen about the very first mission statement. Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about that. You remember what it was?
I can't vertebrate them, but it was about the philosophy was that there's a lot of small agencies that can't afford training. And so some of the better training comes with the larger agencies with bigger budgets. So we wanted to disseminate that same level of training, that same level of expertise to the guys that were doing the job in smaller towns, smaller budgets. They just can't afford it. So that's what it was all about. Absolutely.
And that program, that association just blew up. It's so big. I remember helping out along the way, and the conferences grew, and the classes grew, and the participation. Everybody wanted to be a part of it. And that's kind of how we all kind of came together. Our program, the ALERRT program, kind of blossomed out of that. Mm-hmm. I think all of us had become friends through training that was being sponsored by the TTPOA. And when we started out our deal, our program started based on providing active shooter training to law enforcement around the country. Or actually, we started out providing it to people around the state of Texas, and it grew from there. But the program actually had its genesis from guys like you who were already teaching active shooter training. Where did that whole concept or that whole mindset of teaching active shooter come from?
Well, we had seen the writing on the wall, and that it was a matter of time for something like that horrific happen in Houston. Obviously everybody remembers University of Texas and Charles Whitman that climbed up on the tower and killed. And police had no response at that time. But there were a lot of other active shooter situations going on, not necessarily so much in schools at the time, but a lot of it in businesses. You think of James Huberty in San Diego, went into McDonald's and killed 19 people, wounded another 21. Mark Essex went into the Howard Johnsons in New Orleans and killed I can't remember how many people. That situation lasted for days, and once again, police had no response. There was Jonesboro, Arkansas, the Paducah, Kentucky. I can just go on and on and on. These were all way before Columbine. And so I was proposed that we have some sort of rapid response training for the SWAT team, where we went in with little or no information, just as soon as we got on the scene, emergency assault on the structure to try to stop the shooting, stop the killing. And that was well received. There was no problem. But then I got to thinking, with our response team, especially in a city the size of Houston, I mean, it's 620 some odd square miles. It was 20, 30 minutes before the first SWAT officer was on the scene, and that's on a good day with no traffic. Right. I realized that in most of these situations, they're over in 10, 15 minutes, everything's over with, and it was going to be the patrol officers that were going to make a difference, that were going to actually save the lives, probably before us. So I was proposing back then to the administration, hey, we need to be training patrol officers this, and they're like, oh, no, that's SWAT tactics. No, they are going to get to the scene, contain it, and they're going to wait for you, and you guys are going to go in. And I'm just like, this is not where it needs to be. It needs to be the patrol officers training that. That's hostage rescue. That's SWAT. No, in this case, it is hostage rescue, but it's the patrol officers that are going to make the difference, not us.
Yeah, they're going to be there first.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we talked about, I know on the beginning of the program, or on the beginning of the ALERRT training, we always talked about that pendulum swing, about how the training was specialized. For a while there, it was specialized. But man, we realized there was not enough time to wait for the specialized guys to get there, and that's how it all came back around.
And I'd like to add to that. And then somewhere along the line, it started getting, maybe it was the Paducah, Kentucky, and the Jonesboro, Arkansas, and it started migrating more into the schools, and obviously with horrific consequences because they're such a soft target. And so we started moving our active shooter training as a SWAT team from businesses and places where we could get into and train to schools. And I can remember at the time getting with the Houston Police Department, the Houston Independent School District Police Department. They had their own school police department, and asking them, it was summertime, hey, can you find me a school that that's no one's there and we could use for training? And yeah, sure. And so they found a great school for us. We could go in and train and work those hallways, work those classrooms, and that was invaluable. And they said, hey, can we come along and train, with you guys, watch, observe, fill in wherever we can? I was like, absolutely. I don't see a problem with that at all. And I can remember a supervisor at the time, I won't say his name, but walked up and at the beginning of the training said, why are those guys here? Pointing at the ISD officers. And I said, well, they got us the building. This is the reason we're here. Without them, we couldn't even be here. And they just want to, observe some of the training, maybe take part in a little bit and here and there, and they're not going to get in our way. Absolutely not. And I just looked at him like, why? He said, I don't want anyone to be able to say that we trained those guys. I don't want to be responsible for that. And I'm looking at him like, these are the guys that are going to save our children and the children of the city of Houston. Why would you worry about liability? But I had to go up and tell them, hey guys, I'm sorry, I can't let you take part in the training. You talk about embarrassing. That was about as embarrassing. Am I bad for not getting it approved earlier? Yeah. Of course, I know what would happen. I'd got it shut down, but I had to go tell them. Of course, thank goodness that mindset's all gone away after Columbine. There was a shift in the paradigm, and nobody pushes back on that kind of stuff now.
Yeah, and that's I guess a lot of the stuff that you all taught us along the way, right? Ask for forgiveness, not permission, right?
Absolutely.
All right, so I learned that one along the way from a couple of y'all. Sandy, you were always good with communications, and some of the stuff that the Houston SWAT team was lucky enough to participate in or be granted by, by the groups that were around, all the big business groups that were around the city of Houston. And for those of you all who don't know how big the port of Houston is, and people don't think about it as the port of Houston, but that's what it is. It's a huge port city.
Huge.
And I don't know how much commerce is done in that city, but there is a lot of stuff, a lot of area that you guys cover, and there's a lot of dollars that are being protected by that police department.
Absolutely.
those guys, those companies, those corporations were always more than willing to help, but there was always a bridge to gap, and that's usually the communication. How did you bridge that gap? Because I know you did a lot of it.
Well, I got a lot of credit for going in and starting those relationships with companies and corporations and facilities and getting us in. But I'll tell you, I got to credit the SWAT team, because that uniform I was wearing and the fact of who I was associated with them is what got me in the door. Now, after that, building the relationship, yeah, okay, there was a little bit of schmoozing going on, I'll admit that. But that got me in the door every time. And to find those facilities to real world situations and environments, I mean, we were training in high rises because we knew that we could have, in fact, we did have a hostage situation in a high rise. And we knew that we might have to work within that environment. We wanted to know as much about a high rise as we could. And we would get in there with those businesses, and they would give us floors that were empty or being renovated. And we would get with the building engineers and the mechanics people that worked on there, and they showed us things like utility chases we didn't know anything about. And they showed us how we could get in a utility chase, and we could traverse from one floor to another, never even use a stairway or an elevator. Wow. It was amazing. And then they showed us how we can get on top of elevators and use the inspection controls and ride from one floor to another and be the next floor up above where the elevator's at. We love moving from one floor to another inside an elevator shaft because the environment is always the same. It's always quiet, it's always dark, and it's always there's no wind. It's not like trying to rappel down the outside of a building. Yeah. And heaven forbid when I got to do that, it's in the middle of a thunderstorm or at night or something else, you know. So that there was, and then you're right, in the port, just another classic situation. The same supervisor told me that we are not going to handle a hostage situation if it happens in a port. That's the Coast Guard. And I'm like, really? And he said, yeah. So I went out to the Coast Guard and I asked him, hey, if we have a hostage situation in the port, are you guys going to handle it? And they said, absolutely not. We'll handle the waterways, but we don't go into boats against armed people, not in a hostage situation. Yeah. So I went back to that same supervisor, and he had to relent and say, well, okay. So then I got to a school, learned how to do waterborne operations, and then started teaching it, and then I even taught it to TTPOA. And then, thank goodness, we had a great relationship with the Army, the Special Ops guys out of Fort Bragg. I'm not supposed to say their name, but right. You know what I'm talking about. And they would come down with a squadron, and we learned untold amount of tactics and techniques with those guys, learning how they did things. You know, of course, their operational environment was a third world country somewhere else where they're having to fight their way in, do the gig, and fight their way out in a matter of, and usually at night. But those same tactics and techniques get down into a civilian law enforcement mode where the rules of engagement are obviously different. But those, if it works in a third world country under those conditions, it can definitely work in our own backyard. We learned a lot. Yeah,
once those training techniques came out, man, that was great for us as well. I remember having a conversation with one of the HRT guys from FBI, and we were talking about plane overtakings and plane hijackings, and how do we integrate with you guys? What do we do? What point does it become yours? And we're just assuming that, hey, we're holding it down until you guys get there. And they're like, absolutely not. It's going to take us 2 hours to get off the ground. Yeah. It's like, this is your situation until we get there. So you guys need to start training on learning how to do it. And that's where all those military tactics that were being taught to us came into play. And one of the cool things that we found is every single one of the airlines carriers, the big name groups out there, they were more than willing to make their planes available.
Absolutely.
It was overnight. It was overnight training. But man, they was like, yeah, absolutely, come on out. We'll clean it up, and then y'all can go, and then we'll clean it up when you're done.
Absolutely. We'd move from a 737 to 747 to 777, and the whole thing was we had to work at night because that plane just flew in from somewhere, and in the morning it was flying out, and we couldn't damage anything, so we had to really be careful. But we'd learned so much about those aircraft crawling in and out, and find out how to get up into the cockpit from the cargo bay on some aircraft. Some you couldn't. But the one thing I always went away with after aircraft assault training, I was thinking, man, if this ever happens for real against trained terrorists or terrorists that know what they're doing and know how to be prepared for us, I hope I'm on vacation because it's going to be bad. It's going to be real, real bad. Now, if you get your nutcase that didn't know what the hell he's doing, we could resolve that situation with little or no bad outcome, but. Yeah, if you get a real bad, that's such a hardened target. There's so many things you can do in an aircraft to stymie the guys that are coming in, especially with our capabilities at the time. I hope that never happens.
Yeah, it was always really fun learning those things. It was like real Keanu Reeves stuff, but in real life. I remember the planes. I remember getting on a train. I remember the buses. And it's like learning how to disable those machines were just unreal and so simple if you're learning it from the right person.
Yep.
That was great stuff. So it was a lot of training. What was the turn in training, or was there any big turns in training that you remember along the way? Because you were around training. You've been around training for years, man, for 30 years or so. What have been the big shifts in training that you saw, or what have been the big changes in who we're listening to? Because everything changes. I remember my team was an old school team, and we had to do things a certain way. And I remember some of the biggest debates were between different teams. We do this tactic, and they do that tactic.
Yeah.
What were some of the changes that you felt that were kind of tough to go through?
Well, when I first got on the SWAT team, we were all about surround it and go slow, try to drive them to our ambush, not go to theirs. Obviously, in a hostage situation, you don't have that luxury. And we didn't do any dynamic entries on narcotic search warrants or anything. And along the way, we started learning dynamic tactics from the guys out of Fort Bragg, and then even some SEALs would come in with a team, and we'd train with them, and we started getting pretty proficient at that. And we started applying that to those sorts of situations, and things got very dynamic and very fast, and it was exciting and it was fun. But looking back on it, I realize now how dangerous it was, because a well-placed, well-executed ambush is almost impossible to defeat. And thank God we didn't come up against one of those, because I don't care how good you are, people are going to die if you come up against that. So, I think about how many times I risked my life executing a no-knock search warrant for dope. And I look back on it now, and I just think that was crazy. And I'm a big hypocrite. Granted, I did it. I taught it. I thought it was cool, and it was a thing to do. But I look back on it now and think, unless lives are at jeopardy, unless lives are being lost or potentially going to be lost, I don't think I'd ever go fast anymore. I mean, just to do a dynamic entry. And so my philosophy has changed so much over the years.
Sure.
And I'm always going to go slow if I can. If I have the luxury of going slow and taking one piece of real estate at a time, own it, learn as much about the next environment before you move into it, and be prepared with as much of your tactics and equipment that you have your ability to gather in that whatever period of time that is. You're going to be much more prepared and more than likely have a better outcome than let's grab our shit and go. That just rarely comes out all right. I just got lucky. I will admit, I got lucky so many times, because it could have turned out so much worse.
Oh yeah, I remember we had days like that where that was the going tempo, and there was all the undercover units had stuff that they wanted to run, and we'd prep warrant days, and there was 2 or 3, sometimes 5 houses in one shift that we're going to go knock down, bring both shifts of the SWAT guys in, and we were knocking stuff in. And like you said, it's like the mindset changes. We learn more, and we have to evolve. Everybody evolves, and we do things a little bit different now. And that's I think evolving into better training is a good thing. But it's kind of hard to beat the personnel that we had. I mean, I remember the workouts. I remember the training, just all of the training overall was great, but it didn't matter what city we went to, if we were going to go to another person's training class or they were coming to ours. But I remember the guys just pushed and pushed and pushed. And I know my team, it's like when I got to my team, I thought I was fit. And I thought I was a good shooter. And it's like, they said, don't worry about all that stuff. We're going to make you better. And I was, shit, I'm already kind of good. Man, I was nothing compared to these guys.
Yeah.
Like these guys, we had, I remember Frankie. It's like Frankie could run. And we were hitting the 1.5 mile mark a little under 8 minutes. And Frankie was talking to me like in a normal voice. And when we got to the 1.5 mile mark, which is where I was going to stop, he's like, what are you doing? It's like, we're still going. It's like, don't stop. We're going to go. We got 3 miles to go. It's like, oh my God, man. And it was just unreal, the caliber of people that we were working with, and training with, and operating with. But it was always great. What about your guys? Because I know I trained with all of your guys, and I mean, one was better than the next.
Yeah, every team seemed like they had their specialty. I can remember San Antonio. You guys were always known for your fitness. I mean, the just animals come up on an obstacle course, and I was just amazed at how fast you guys could fly through that. I think Houston, I don't know that we had animals, we had guys, but as a group, I don't know that was necessarily our strength. I think our strength was more in tactics and how we operated on a scene.
Yeah.
And then you get Dallas; those guys were, once again, very they were great competitors. I mean, those guys always stayed cool, and then great shooters, But I would say on the Houston team, it was more that. Austin, they were so aggressive way back in the day.
Yeah.
I can imagine they were doing explosive breaches on narcotic search warrants before we'd even had an explosive breaching program. And I was amazed by that. And then it seems like now Austin has almost flipped 180. They're not near as aggressive as they used to be, or at least that's the information I'm hearing out of it. And I don't know if it's because of the politics have changed or what. But yeah, once again, in Houston, we had a lot of equipment, and a lot of that came because of the money. The money, it's in a big city like that, and we had a lot of people that were very philanthropic, and you could go to them and say, "Hey, I need this or this. How much?" Well, it's going to cost $240,000 for that. Okay, here, write them a check, and you just look at them like, "Wow."
Yeah.
Write a check for a $240,000 vehicle. They just, okay, here you go. What do you need next? Come back and see me.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And I think that speaks a lot to the people that are out there. We've always had a great connection in San Antonio. We always had a great connection with the community. The public loved us, and it didn't matter what was going on. It's like we always had great support from the city, and I know you guys did too. Even when things were going bad, the SWAT guys were always out there, and they were always the faces, and you're always willing to go to the shows and go, shake hands, talk to people.
Right.
And that was a big thing. That was a real big thing for you guys.
Yeah.
So along the way, we've met a lot of really cool people. And I know that, I want to get, because we sat down because we want to talk about this book that you just wrote. But this isn't the first book that you were associated with. And you were associated with something a little while back, and we were actually talking about Ron earlier, Ron and Tom Majerus.
Yeah.
Like those guys are old school, I guess, pastors of the word, right?
Yeah, right.
Man, talk about old school. I think Tom probably started out with a stone tablet. Yeah, I don't know. I saw him recently at a retirement ceremony for somebody else, and it was just funny. He's like, he just keeps on going.
Yeah.
But Ron McCarthy,
Yep.
the grandfather of it all.
Absolutely.
How did he come into play for us?
Well, I guess I'll try to take a little credit for that. When I took over the TTPOA in 1995, I guess it was, we were a little bit floundering. I was elected at a conference, and I handed everything that the TTPOA owned in terms of records was in a shoebox, literally in a shoebox. We were in debt, and we had lost our charter with the franchise of the state of Texas, which was not good. And we didn't have a 501c3. There was a lot of things that were just going around. So it took a while, and myself and a lot of other people worked on getting the organization, founded and built the way it should be. But once we got that, then I'm about going out and making this big conference. And I reached out to NTOA and said, hey, who are your headline instructors? Would you guys like to come down and be part of our conference? And they were very gracious, absolutely. Our best lecturer on, hostage situations is a guy named Ron McCarthy, and I'd heard his name, but I really didn't know him. And then we've got several more people that different levels of discipline and expertise. But they sent down probably a cadre of 4, 5, or 6, and that's where I met Ron McCarthy. And I have yet to hear anyone know as much about as many different aspects of law enforcement. I don't care if it's a patrol officer on the beat all the way up to a SWAT team in a hostage situation. There's nothing that you can talk to Ron McCarthy about that he can't bring to the table as much or more than anybody you've heard about. The guy has lived there, has done that, and he's my mentor. And,
Kind of tell us a little bit about who he is and what his background is.
Okay, well, Ron went through the Navy. He always says, I said, somebody was in the military. He said, well, I wasn't in the military. I was in the Navy. Of course, it's a joke. He's very proud of his service. And then he got into law enforcement. Came from a small town in Arizona, I think Flagstaff, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, came from nothing. I mean, the guy... Great little story about it. A Marine recruiter was talking him into becoming a Marine, and he was so hungry he literally didn't have any money for a meal. And the recruiter gave him a little bit of money. He said, here you go, get you something to eat. Be back in my office in the morning. I'm going to put you on a bus, and you're going to be a Marine. Yes, sir. What time? Be here at 8 o'clock. Yes, sir. So at 8 o'clock he said, I slept on the street that night. Didn't have anything. 8 o'clock next morning, he's standing in front of the recruiting office, and here comes the Navy guy. Comes walking in and says, you here to join the Navy, son? He said, no, sir, I'm going to be a Marine. He said, not today. The Marine guy's not making it. And he said, what? No, he's not going to be here today. But come on in. I tell you what, I'll sign you up, and I'll get you a hot meal in your belly and put you on the bus, and you'll be a Navy. You'll be in the Navy. And he said, okay. So he goes through all the paperwork, signs up. He's walking out the door, and here comes a Marine recruiter. He says, you ready to sign up and be a Marine? He says, no, sir, I just joined the Navy. That guy in there told me you weren't going to be here. That son of a... And he said, man, he went running past him, and next thing you know, they're in a fight back there in the recruiting office. Ron said, I just went on out and waited for the bus. And anyway, that's kind of a funny story. But Ron gets on patrol and goes through the same kind of career a lot of us did, makes sergeant, and he's trying to get on the SWAT team. He said, I actually tried to get on the SWAT team. LAPD had just had a fledgling SWAT team as an operator. He said, didn't make it. But I made it as a sergeant, as a supervisor. And Ron is one of those forward-thinking guys. He's never satisfied with the way things are. It's like, well, this has worked for us, so why not? Let's just stay with this. Not Ron. No, how can we make this better? And how can we always be prepared for the next situation and the next thing that comes? And that's Ron. And so he went through the Watts riots. He was there for the Patty Hearst, the shootout with the Simeonese Liberation Army. I mean, he's been there, done that, and saw how SWAT had progressed over the years. He was one of the first ones to incorporate the idea of taking a distraction device, or what they called a hand grenade simulator at the time that the Army was using, and using it in a law enforcement civilian situation as a diversionary device to give dynamic entry a little bit better chance. Yeah. And I mean, that's just one example of the way he was forward thinking. So he does his career with LAPD, and then he retires, gets into the Department of Energy, and does just outstanding things like that, and then finally retires and starts his own law enforcement company selling law enforcement products, and still heavily involved with the NTOA, and that's how I met him.
Wow. Yeah, he's, and I guess I was going to ask you this question, and I at some point I want to ask him the same question, but you guys have both introduced me to so many people, and I know that you guys have met along the way thousands of people. What was the trick? Because I know that I called Ron, I called you and got Ron's number, and I called Ron and said, hey man, this is Eddie Molina, and I introduced myself over the phone and what I was doing, and he's like, hey man, I remember talking to you at TTPOA, right? And I was like, holy smokes, how did you remember that? Mm-hmm. What was Sandy Wall's trick? Because I know you met thousands of people along the way. How did you remember everybody's name?
Well, I'm getting to where I'm not as good at it anymore. That has to do with the aging thing. But I guess it was just because I was always being called upon to getting those phone calls, getting those, hey, who do you know? And so those names were always coming in front of me so often that it was hard to kind of forget, because I don't have that great a memory. Now, Ron McCarthy, I swear that guy, he hasn't got a name anywhere. And even to this day, I can call him up. And I do call him from time to time and ask him his opinion on something. And it's amazing the recall that man has. But it's just a gift with him is the only thing I can say.
Yeah, that's great. So y'all did a lot of work together on the front end, and you've been a part of a couple of other books. What was the other stuff that y'all worked on? I know there's a book.
Well, Tom Majaris and I co-authored a book called Training the SWAT Trainer.
That's right.
And it was a pretty big success. We did it philanthropically. All the proceeds went to the TTPOA Less Early Scholarship. We didn't make a dime on it, but it was a fun project for me. I'll be honest, Tom did most of the heavy lifting on that, and then we had a couple of other people that wrote different sections. And so it was a collaborative effort, and it was kind of fun. But what that did then is gave me the confidence that, hey, maybe I really could write a book. Because at the time, if somebody said, hey, why don't you write a book about all those stories in your career, I'd have said, no way, man, I'm not a writer. I wouldn't know how to do that. Yeah. And I still don't consider myself a writer, but it did give me the confidence to at least try.
Yeah. You have any good stories you want to share?
Well, there's a bunch of them out there, and if somebody that knows me is listening to them, they probably would ask me to tell the story about the attic shooting that we were in, I'll try to do the Evelyn Wood version of it. For some of you younger guys, that Evelyn Wood was a speed reader, But I always say pagers in my class, and I get these guys looking at me, and I say, y'all don't know what a pager are, do you? And they said, no. Anyway, so I'm aging myself. But we had been in a long-standing situation that started out as a hostage situation, but over time, without boring you with the details, it transformed into just a barricade. We got the hostage out. Willingly walked out. We got two of the bad guys surrendered, but we got the real bad guy, the one that we knew that was really kind of the main guy. He was unwilling to, and he was a career offender, knew he was going to go back to prison forever, so he would just rather die. And he told the other guys that he was going to go hide in the attic, and if they found him, he was just going to shoot it out with us. So we didn't know if he really was in the attic, and so at some point we decided after several hours to make a slow and stealthy entry and start clearing one room of this structure, this house. It was a really nice house, huge house, at a time. And if we made contact with the guy, then we were going to bring the negotiators in, try to make voice contact, and try to somehow get him to surrender. So we're doing the slow, stealthy, sneak and creak and snoop and poop and try to not be detected. And we're clearing one room at a time. We finally come in the kitchen and we're clearing this closet. And when the door opens up, we look, and we were kind of startled. There were stacks upon stacks upon stacks of Shriner Fez caps. Apparently, the owner of the house was the grand poobah of the Shriners. And he had all these purple hats all stacked all on top of them. There must have been about 5 or 6 columns of them. I had to be at least 50, 60, 70 hats in there. So we're like, wow, that's kind of weird. So we made sure nothing else was in there, and we're moving on along. I'm bringing in guys behind me to hold rooms as we clear it. And as we're most of the way through the house, and I'm getting really nervous because I'm thinking, okay, there's only 1 or 2 rooms left, and if this guy's in here, it's going to be a shootout, right? And they keep snapping for me to turn around, and I'm telling them, wait, I'm busy, and they're snapping for me. And so finally I tell my guys, hold up. And I turn around and look, and the guys behind me had all taken off their ballistic helmets, and they had these Shriners caps on, and they're kind of pointing and laughing. And I'm looking at them like, oh, my God. So anyway, long story short, we ended up clearing the whole downstairs, and we stopped, and then we realized, okay, if he is there, he's up in the attic. And so then we all took off our ballistic helmets, and we all put on the Shriner caps, and we're all laughing at each other and kind of take a break. And we ordered in McDonald's hamburgers because nobody had eaten in hours and hours. And so we had finished our burgers, and then we ended up, long story short, we ended up going up into the attic, and we found him, and he was hiding, and he came up out of the insulation, and it was a hell of a gunfight. It was a gunfight. And anyway, he lost. We all won. And
Wow.
and so after that, the captain said, I am never ordering McDonald's hamburgers again. He was like very superstitious. He said, I'm never going to do it again. Next time we'll have pizza, we'll have Whataburgers, whatever, but we're never ordering McDonald's hamburgers. Even though it came out okay for us, not too much for him.
Yeah. Wow. That's a great story.
Yeah.
Now, I've heard that story in so many different versions along the way.
Yeah, there's a lot more to it.
Oh, yeah.
If you read the book, the long version's in that.
Man, that is awesome. So talk a little bit more about the book. What made you decide to put the book together? Because I know, so I can tell you that after 25 years on the police department, one of the things that I wish that I had done was written it down. Mm-hmm. And I wish that would be one of the things, if I was chief for the day, that would be one of the things I would do is I would hire a writing coach and teach all the kids coming through the academy to write. Mm-hmm. I mean, you think about it, in 25 years on the streets and 25 years in that department, if I had written a chapter a year, my kids and my grandkids would have a hell of a book to read about their grandpa. And I think that that's one of the things that we should be teaching all of the new cops out there. All the cops that are in the academy, they're fixing to hit the streets. Yeah. I wish that they would have that tool to get out there. One of the things that I have learned is writing things down does help us get it out.
Oh, yeah.
And that's a big deal, and we'll get to that here in a little while. But, God, I wish that we could all just write our stories down.
Right.
What made you put it all together?
Well, just like all of us, we have friends. Some of them are not in law enforcement. And, we get around having a social hour and a few cocktails. And the next thing you know, hey, tell us some of your stories. And so I tell them. And most of them are funny. Some of them are crazy, outlandish. They couldn't believe that actually happened. Some of them are, pretty dangerous, kind of like the one I just told. And they said, man, you ought to write a book. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard that. And you've probably heard it too, because we all have those stories, right? And so, yeah. And so now I'm retiring. literally retiring from Safariland, and my wife's going, "What are you going to do to keep busy?" And I'm going to be fishing a lot. I'm going to be doing this. I'm doing that. But I'm always worried that maybe I'd see my buddies that just sit on a porch and they get bored, and the next thing you know, they get sick and they die, or they become alcoholics or whatever. And I just wanted to make sure that I stayed busy. And so I said, you know what, I'm gonna start an outline of a book. I don't know if I'll ever finish it. So I started out with my career in the academy, and that was one little section. And I thought of all the little stories that I could write about what happened to me in academy, and just headlines, just titles, just to spark my memory. And then about patrol and all the little stories in patrol, little blurb that would remind me of a story, and I wrote those. And then I had to go work in the jail for 6 months, and so I had a lot of funny stories, things that happened in the jail, so I wrote those down, just once again, just little headliners to remind me about that story. And then in narcotics division, and then finally in SWAT. So pretty soon I've got this outline that is, man, there's got to be, and in fact my wife said, that's too many stories. There's no way that book would be huge. So I had to go through and cull a bunch of them out and got it down, and then I said, you know what, I'm just going to start writing the stories and see where it goes. So it took me 4 years. I'd spend a morning. I'm an early bird. I get up 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, almost every morning. And before my wife got up, I'd have an hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours, and I'd write a story, and I'd just write that story. Now my wife taught high school for 23 years, so being a school teacher, I'd hand her the story. What do you think? Oh my God. She'd get her reading pen out and she'd start ripping that thing up and said, this is not a complete sentence. This is a run-on sentence. This doesn't make sense. That's not grammatically correct. She handed it back to me, and I was in the second grade again. And I'd drop my head and go back into my office, and I'd have to rewrite it, right? So I'd rewrite it 3 or 4 times, and I finally she goes, that's pretty good. And so I put it away. And it took 4 years.
Wow.
And then I started developing a plot, because the book is fictional. It's a novel. It's a fictional character, and but it's shadows my career, and all the funny things that happened to me, and the crazy things that happened to me, and the dangerous things that happened to me, all happened to this character. Plus, all the crazy and funny things that happened to buddies of mine that I know about, all happened to this character.
Wow.
And then there's a storyline. So there's a villain right from the get-go. You meet the villain, and he's an instructor in the academy. And he's a make-believe. He's the only fictional character in the entire book. Now, all the names have been changed to protect the guilty, but there's not one real name in there of a real character. So I've changed them all. But the guys that were part of this, when they read the story, they'll know, yeah, that was me. But anyway, long story short, and at the end there's a big twist, a big gotcha, and I've already let some of my family members and a couple other people read it, and I asked them, did you see that coming at the end? They said, no, man, that was a big surprise. I did not see that coming. Wow. So that's the one thing I'm most proud about as a book, is I was able to actually come up with a twist at the end that most people won't see coming.
That's pretty cool, I guess, concept on how to put it all together. 'Cause, I mean, you put all the stories together. What's the main character's name?
Andy Wallace.
Oh, nice. I like it. I like that. What a cool spin. Yeah, I don't know how they do it. I just got done talking to Nick Lavery, who's a 5th Group Special Forces guy, lost his leg in battle, and he just released a book. And he said, man, everybody wants you to write a war stories book. Everybody said, man, you got to write all your war stories down. He's like, that's not what my book's about. My book is about the game plan for life.
Oh, really?
And yeah, and he took a different road on how to put it all together. But I love the way your thought process went on this book. It's like I'm looking forward to sitting down and just spending some time in front of the water and reading it.
Oh, yeah.
Hopefully I can get a signed copy at some point.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
Eddie. It's going to happen.
Man, I tell you, I want to hear story after story, and I know that we could probably sit out here and just go story after story on these things. I've heard so many of them, but I want to go back to the guys, because I've had a great relationship with your team. Tony G, Glenn, Mo, man, Tony P, like all of those guys are retiring now.
Yeah.
Hootie's fixing to retire. Like
Yeah,
everybody's retiring.
Yeah, it's amazing. There's always a transition. And I was a young guy at one point, and I'd see guys retiring and moving on. And then it happened to me, and now there's another generation that's happening to. And life goes on, and hopefully, I know those guys. And almost everybody that you talk about, they all had plans after law enforcement, or maybe in another facet of law enforcement. There's like this geriatric squad out at the range now that all the guys that were in SWAT go out there to teach now, which is good. That is great because they've got so much to offer. Whereas I was doing it as just a part-time when I wasn't training. I was out at the academy teaching patrol officers how to search a building. We were using SWAT tactics and showing them how to use a mirror and things like that they hadn't been exposed to. And so I was just trying to pass that on. But now the police department has obviously recognized the value in that, and they have guys doing it as part of their career. And that I can't say enough about that.
Yeah, they've created a pretty cool tactical village out there.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of extra training coming out from quality instructors.
Yeah.
Those guys that are out there right now, I mean, you couldn't have put together a better training squad.
Absolutely.
So I remember, you remember old man Corey from my team.
Oh, Phil, yeah.
I remember talking to Grandpa along the way, and he said that you'll know when it's time.
Yeah.
So the guys on our team, we had a full-time team, and if you studied to promote in our department, you had to leave the team.
And we did too.
Yeah, and that was the hard thing about the teams, the full-time teams, like your team, our team, Dallas. I think Austin, part of the Austin team was a full-time team. If you promoted, you had to leave. Mm-hmm. And he said, you'll know when it's time.
Yeah.
He said, and you'll know when it's time to retire as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
How did you know it was time?
Well, I was kind of butting heads with a supervisor that was over there at the time, and Safari Land had come along. About the last 12 years of my career, I was a part-time instructor for them.
Yeah.
And take a week of vacation, they'd send me somewhere, and they said, hey man, you're getting kind of old. You're thinking about retirement? And I'm like, I'm not that old. And then one day I went and looked in the mirror, and I went, oh my God, I am old. And so I called them up, and when me and the supervisor butted heads one time too many, and I realized he was supervisor, I wasn't. And just like you, I never took a promotional exam because I always loved where I was at. And if I became a sergeant, that they were going to send me to Northeast nights with Tuesdays and Wednesdays off, take my take-home car away and all my other privileges and a job that I love. And I'm like, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to stay here. But anyway, long story short, I could kiss that guy on the mouth right now because he made a very tough decision very easy. He made it a little bit uncomfortable for me, and I had another opportunity with Safari Land, and thank goodness that they offered me that job because it was a whole nother learning opportunity. I went into a whole different field, and that's the way life should be. You should never stop learning, because the minute you stop learning, you stop growing, and when you stop growing, then you're dying. You should always be about growing and learning and enjoying and what's the next thing. That's what drives me. And I'm so fortunate for my career because there were so many things that could have gone so wrong for me many times. And like I said, I hold no grudges against anybody over there. We were all in it for the right reason. We just had different personalities and different ways of getting there, and I get that now. And life goes on, and it worked out great. So no regrets. Yeah,
that's great. I mean, I don't know how I figured out it was time when I left. The opportunity came along. So the opportunity came along, and the spot came open at the ALERRT program in a full-time position, and I applied for it. And I was always teetering back and forth on, am I at that point yet? And this position came open, I applied for it, and John, the assistant director, called me, and he says, hey, man, you got the spot. If you want it, it's yours. And I thought, that was great. That's my sign. And I put my paperwork in, and I started my whole disappearing process without telling everybody. And I let the guys at my unit know. It's like, hey, man, you're going to have to find somebody to replace me. And they're like, why? It's like, I'm out. I'm retiring in 2 weeks. And they're like, holy smokes, are you serious? Like, yeah, I'm serious. I'm out. Yeah. I didn't tell anybody anything. I was just ready to check out. But we talked about it earlier. One of the things that I noticed, it's like the day after the day I left, the day of my retirement, I noticed it was like a light switch. And I had great jobs in the department. The jobs that I wanted, I got to work. But I noticed that the day that I left, it was like a light switch of stress just disappeared. Yep. And I never felt it. Yep. I never felt it. And I recently was listening to an old interview. Dakota Myers was talking to maybe Joe Rogan, and he was talking about the post-traumatic stuff that he was going through. And his words were, what do you mean, how do I act? This is the way I always feel. And it's like, I didn't think about it till I just re-listened to that here recently. He's like, that's just the speed we operated at. And we never felt that stress before. Because I know I felt it, and I heard so many stories about that stress. You're going to feel a weird dump of stress. Mm-hmm. Did you feel that too?
Yeah, I did, and not so much like the day. Well, for me, it was that evening when I drove home, because every day for 22 years, when I drove that SWAT car into my driveway, I had to turn it around and get it ready to leave, and to make sure. And I had to go inside and make sure everything was placed in its place, because I'd wake up, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, jump up and throw on my Batman outfit and run out and get in the car and take off. And when I drove in that driveway for the last day and realized I'm not leaving tonight, I'm staying here. Unless I want to leave, I'm staying here.
Yeah.
And that was like, wow, this is great. It was an awesome feeling.
You've had a great career, and obviously you had a great support staff along the way. We suffer a lot in the department through, and nobody makes a big. I know in the military ranks they make a big deal about the post-traumatic stress, and we don't hear a lot about it coming from the law enforcement side, the first responder side, and it's not like a huge statement to say, hey, we're neglected. I'm just saying we don't talk about it enough. But one of the things that I started to hear recently was my own mental health journey, kind of to get as much information as I can, learn about resiliency, learn about mental health, and learn about recovery from the stressful lives that we live, and what the symptoms are, and what it is that we're actually hiding. Because I think we all hide stuff along the way, and I've heard that so many times that the biggest thing that we suffer from is hiding stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's weird, but we've learned so much along the way, the different types of therapies that are out there, but everybody goes back to the talk therapy and journaling and writing stuff down. And I think that in the generation that we grew up in, we were always taught that the department shrink is there if you have to go. And in other words, if you have to go, it means that they're making you go. And if you went to the department shrink, you were kind of looked at differently.
Absolutely.
But we were encouraged to not do that. We were encouraged to not seek help. And it seems like the tides have turned. Like the subject of mental health has grown, the subject of resiliency has grown, and I'm all about pushing that out there. So I'm documenting everything I'm doing. I'm pushing it out to our cadre so they all know what's out there. And the funny thing is that the Tim Williams of the group, the old school guys, they're calling and say, man, I have been wanting to do this for so long. I've been wanting to follow this journey. I've been wanting to contact a therapist. What did you find? Did you find anything like that afterwards when you started talking to the guys and started sitting down for a cold one, with all of the retired crew? Did you guys find that in common?
Absolutely. In fact, it's funny you should talk about the departmental psychologist. I talk about this in the book. We had a departmental psychologist. His name was Dr. Reedy. You may have he came and spoke at the conference a few times. Great guy, very enlightening. And obviously after a shooting, and I've had a couple, I had to go talk to him, and it was departmental policy, and we always had a great conversation. But it was like he could see something was bothering me inside. It was like he could look right through me, and he'd make little comments like, "Is there anything else you want to talk about?" "Oh, I'm good, doc, because I'm a tough guy, right? I don't want to break down here, and I don't want to open up myself up to vulnerability. I'm a tough guy." And then he walked me out to the car. And he said, "Well, listen, I just want you to know my door's always open, day or night. You call me if you ever want to talk, And one of the times I went and saw him after shooting, he said, you got kids, right?" And I said, "Well, my daughter's an infant, but my son, he's 5 years old, 6 years old." And he said, "Have you told him about the shooting?" And I said, "No, doc, he's 6 years old." And he said, "Well, you got a neighborhood you live in, right?" "Yeah." He said, "Do your neighbors know about the shooting?" "Well, yeah, I guess so. They probably saw it on the news, and I know a couple of them have asked me if I was okay and everything." "Well, they have kids, right?" "Yeah." "Well, what if their kids talk to your kid?" And they said, "Hey, I heard your daddy was in the shooting the other night." They hear it from him. Would you want that?" I never thought about that. And he said, "Well, I'm not telling you to do it. That's your decision, but I know you'll come to the right one, but just think it over." So I did, and it kind of bothered me a little bit. Maybe I should, or maybe I should. And it wasn't maybe a couple of weeks. I was driving down to the back of our subdivision to a lake that we had, and he and I were going to go fishing, and the moment just hit me as being right. And so he's a little kid over there in the passenger side, and I said, "Hey, son, your daddy's a policeman, right?" And, "Yeah." "I have to go get the bad guys." "Yeah, right, yeah." And, sometimes, I might have to actually shoot somebody. And he gets kind of solemn. He said, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, I just want you to know that I had to shoot somebody." And he said, "Yeah, is he dead?" And I said, "Yeah, he's dead, son." And he got real quiet, and he's just looking out the windshield, and I'm thinking, man, did I make a mistake? And all of a sudden he turns and looks at me with tears in his eyes and says, "Daddy, did he have a son?" And man, you talk about blown away. I wasn't expecting that. And all I could say is, I don't know, son. I don't know.
Wow.
And then he seemed like he was okay with it after that. But that's in the book as well. It was one of those moments I'll never forget.
Wow. That's a great story. Yeah. That probably would have taken me off my center as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's so many things that happen in our lives that and I just heard one of the guys at the office was talking about the biggest problem or the biggest battles for law enforcement isn't the guy or for the guys or the guys and girls in law enforcement. The biggest battle isn't out on the streets. They say it's back at the department, back at the office.
Right.
And I think that there's equal weight between what's going on at the office and what's going on at home, and our ability to bridge those two, because you have to bridge those two.
Absolutely.
They say, I remember hearing in the academy, they said, you can't only hang out with cops. You can't only, and there's got to be some kind of gap, and you got to leave everything at work. When you leave work, you got to leave everything
Right.
at work. But there's only a certain group of people that really know what we're going through.
Absolutely.
And even more so when you go to the more specialized units.
Absolutely.
It's like when we would travel to go teach and we'd go travel to go train together, when we were together with all the other SWAT guys and all the other specialized units, it's like
Right.
you had that certain bond.
Right.
But yeah, it's like you have to share those things.
Yeah, and if you're around guys that are like you, that are living the same thing, and you make a crude comment, we all start laughing because we know we're just joking around and making it funny. I'd make the same crude comment at like our family Christmas, and people look at me like I'm weird, like I just said that, and I realized, this was not the environment to make that kind of joke, but it's a kind of a coping mechanism in the same way, It's like you got to laugh about some of these things or you'll cry. And that's kind of what the book is about, and it is parallel to my career, because I will admit, toward the end of my career, I was self-medicating with alcohol, probably drinking a lot more than I should, and but it was a coping mechanism, and it was a way of relieving stress, and and I write about that. And this character, he goes through a lot of the things that I went through, and it's I know a lot of cops. I got one of my best friends right now is. He's struggling with alcoholism, and I know it came from, he was a homicide detective for years, and it was just, and he talks about watching bodies being filleted every day for a living, on an autopsy table, and that's got to get to you after a while.
Yeah, and we have a weird sense of how we turn things off, and we just kind of deal with it and cope with what's happening. But yeah, it's like it gets to you. It loads up, and I did not realize how much was loading up. I didn't realize how much was loading up on me. But talking about it afterwards, it really helps. But yeah, it's like I think that's another one of those things, Chief, for a day, that I would push more about learning about that part of life, making it easier for these kids when they get to 20, 25, and 30 years to be able to retire. Mm-hmm. It's like to be able to retire healthily. It's like be able to walk away
Absolutely.
and not have to be struggling with heart disease and diabetes and all the other things that we force ourselves into. I want to change the topic a little bit because this is real serious, and I don't want to. I guess I don't want to ignore it because I think it's very important to me to focus on it. I intend to do as much focusing on the mental health and resiliency subject as I can with the podcast. And we've had so many people who are gracious to share their stories. We've had guys that have lost their legs in battle. We've had Marines and Army guys. We've had other cops, and they're all sharing their stories, and it's really cool how many people are out there talking about it. But I want to kind of change the tempo and change the tone because I want to hear something from the Sandy Wall joke file, because I found some of the best jokes, some of the best anecdotes, some of the best, but just life stories were funny. And I'll share this, and I don't share a whole bunch about my ex, but one of the things that happened on one of our call outs, and she'll tell you the story if you ever run into her. We had a call out in the middle of the night, and I can't remember the situation, but we got paged. The beeper went off in the middle of the night. The beeper went off. I got up and got dressed, went to the call out, and as soon as we got set up, the guy gave up, put him in cuffs, handed him over to the patrol guys, cleaned our stuff up, put it away, went back, and I'm getting back to the bed around the time the kids are waking up. It's like, what were you? Like, what are you? Like, why are you? Why are your boots on?
Yeah.
I was like, I just got back from a call out. Yeah. Did you ever have those situations?
Oh, absolutely. And a couple of times she didn't believe me until we went and saw it on the news. It's like, Lair, I was there. Oh, okay, all right, And then there was a few times, it seems like if we had a call up in a good part of town, the media was there in just groves. And if we were over in the ward, a section of town where the crime is so high and everything, they're so used to it, they may or may not. They'd call up, did y'all kill anybody? No. Okay, well, we're not coming.
We're not coming.
Yeah, so then I tell her I'm at a call up all night. She says, that's funny. I watched the news. I didn't see anything. And I'm like, I can't tell you why the news media didn't show up and it didn't become a story, but I'm telling you I was there. But it happened. But yeah, there's a lot of funny stories that I write about in the book. One of them in particular, I'm a young SWAT officer, and we're on a perimeter that it was the guy had chain link fence. It must have been 3 acres of chain link fence, and it was all cleared except for some big, large trees. And they told me to go around back and find a position for containment. They'd get somebody with me in a little bit, and so I go back to this chain link fence. I can barely see the house, so I'm thinking I got to get inside there and find a closer place. So I'm sneaking up around behind the trees, and I find this great big old oak tree, and I'm thinking, okay, this looks pretty good. And all of a sudden, the back porch light of the house comes on. And this guy had been shooting at some of the patrol officers before we got there. And then I see the back door open up, and here comes this dog out. And I'm thinking, uh-oh, this ain't good. Well, I just stayed still, and I got to looking, and it's kind of a puppy. It's not a real mean-looking dog. And he's sniffing around, and he's walking around and finally he spots me. And he just freezes, and I'm thinking, okay, what's he going to do? And he started barking, and I'm like, come here, come on. And so I see his tail wag a little bit, and he comes a little closer, and he finally comes all the way up to me, and I start petting him. And he's like, and then his tongue's out, and he's laughing, and we're best of friends, right? So because I don't want him to give my position away, to let this guy know I'm out here behind this tree. And so I stop petting him, and I'm turning around and looking, and all of a sudden he jumps up on my back leg, and he starts humping me. And I'm like, hey, get off me. and so he runs out there about 3 or 4 yards and stops and starts barking at me. And I'm like, oh, no, come here. And he comes back to me, and I start petting him again. I pet him a little, and we're best of friends again, right? Well, then pretty soon I quit petting him, and I'm turning around and looking and watching the back of the house. He jumps up and starts humping me again. I'm like, stop it. Well, this goes on like 2 or 3 times. Finally, I just let him have his way with me. I just left my leg out there. He did whatever he was going to do, and pretty soon he gives it up, and he goes around the yard.
Gosh.
And then finally the guy ends up surrendering, and we come out the front. We go back, and I never saw the dog again. He hadn't ridden, he hadn't called or anything. But
oh my God.
But I did what I had to do to make sure I didn't get compromised on my position that night. And it was a pretty funny story.
Wow, what a great story! Holy smokes, man! I don't think we can top it. I don't think we can do anything better than to end on that story, man. Sandy, let's finish up with talking about the book. What's the name of the book, and where can we find it?
It's called The Long Road Home, and it's in editing right now. It was due to be out later this month, but just had a conference call with the publishers, and they're running a little bit slow, and printing, and with COVID and all these back, and everybody's got a story. But it's going to be out probably the second week in April now. It will be on Amazon. Cool. And so you can buy it both digitally and in hardback. There is a promo right now, and if you go ahead and pre-order, it'll come as a signed copy. So I've got to meet with the publishers here in about another 3 or 4 more weeks when the finally come to print and sign all these books. But you'll be able to. It's called ISL, like Ida Sam Lincoln Publishing, islpublishing.com.
All right.
For the promo,
yeah. Or
or just wait till the end of April, and it'll be available on Amazon. The Long Road Home.
The Long Road Home. Andy Wallace.
That's him.
Wow. This is going to be great. I can't wait to put this out there. Anything else you want to cover before we go? Anybody you want to talk about? Anybody you want to thank?
I just want to thank the guys that are out there still doing the job. I tell you, when I was a cop, everybody loved firemen, and they kind of like cops, but everybody still loves firemen. But it's not so much with cops. Now, having said that, I know the silent majority are out there, still respect law enforcement, like law enforcement, understand and appreciate the job you guys are doing on a daily basis. But it's the squeaky wheel. And unfortunately, that's who we listen to. And I would be so depressed. To be totally honest, I'm not sure if I was starting all over again, I would go into law enforcement. I just don't know if I would. Maybe I would, but I'm just so appreciative that there are people out there that are still willing to put that uniform on and that badge on and go out and put their lives on the line so that we can all sleep peacefully in our beds at night. And that's a saying I have on top of the book on the front cover. It's George Orwell's.
Yeah.
People sleep soundly in their beds at night because of rough people who are willing to do violence on their behalf. And I thank God for those people that are out there keeping us all safe.
Yeah, that's a great message. Way to wrap it up. Yeah, for those of y'all who are on the streets or hitting the streets or in the academy, learning your new path, man, feel free to reach out to us. You can call us. Yeah, my information's always out there, molina@alert.org, or you can email the podcast directly at thecall@alert.org. I've learned so much from guys like Sandy. Kind of been mentoring a lot of people like myself, and you never stop. So that's always helped me along the way. I appreciate you taking the time to do this with me, and I know we're going to push this out to a lot of people, and they'll get something out of it.
Always a pleasure, Eddie.
Thanks, Sandy.
My
Appreciate
pleasure.
it.
Bye.